Hello everybody, my name is Mike and welcome back to my channel where, for some reason, I'm still playing Cities Skylines 2. As I sat down to plan out this video, I was going to complain about the worryingly small number of updates that have come out since the rather disastrous release of the game a year ago. But then Paradox and Colossal Order, presumably realising that a load of 1 year on videos were about to come out, decided to rush out a patch and some new content for the game. Editor Mike here. As I'm editing this video, yet another patch has just come out. The second Detailers patch was just released, which does address one thing that I'm going to comment on in this video, but I'm going to carry on regardless. So, the game has finally had some updates, but what has changed in the last few months? And has it made a difference? Let's take a look. You all know the story by now. Cities Skylines 2 released last November to mostly negative reviews. If you want to see my initial reactions to the game, check out my previous videos. It was unfinished, unpolished, poorly optimised and full of bugs. Since my last video, about 6 months after the game's release, I've been dipping in and out occasionally trying out new features and content as they were released. And while it's still a long way from perfect, the game does at least feel like it's heading, slowly, in the right direction. First, let's talk about the new content. They finally activated the Paradox mods store, which is still technically in beta and is definitely a bit clunky, but at least means that we can start using mods, which as a heavy user of the Steam Workshop in Cities 1 I very much appreciate. It is a shame that there isn't an official way to download additional assets for the game yet. Yes, there are a load of unofficial asset packs available on the store, but it all feels a bit dodgy to me and I suspect a lot of that will stop working at some point. I prefer to wait until the separate asset store is finally officially released. I actually understand why they decided to use Paradox mods rather than the Steam Workshop, which would have been easier, but integrating mods into the game makes a lot of sense from a developer's perspective. Though it has to be said this was mainly so that they could offer the same experience across PC and consoles, and given that the console release has been delayed indefinitely, that might have been a questionable decision in hindsight. It just makes the game so much better to be able to control traffic lights and vehicle behaviour at junctions. Detailing's much easier with things like the line tool, and I can finally make sure that my bridges are level at both sides, which, as those of you who've seen my previous videos will know, was somehow one of my biggest gripes. On a side note, I have to disagree with the likes of Biffa who say that all of these features should just be part of the game. Move It and other popular mods sometimes make the game more complicated to use in exchange for an increased customization, or have potentially game-breaking features that players should use at their own risk. There are various technical reasons why the developers made things work the way they do. There are some things like a snapping tool to keep both sides of a bridge level, or a line tool for placing rows of trees and other props that the developers could add, and I wish they would, but at least now with the mod store up and running, these customizations and quality of life features can be added into the game. Editor Mike here. Yes, before you jump in the comments, they did add a line tool in the latest patch, but it's not as good as the one that was already available on the mod store. Another welcome addition is the various packs that have been made available. There was an update a few months ago that added more service buildings, which on its own made me feel a lot happier about the game. I previously complained that there was only one elementary school, for example, which meant that your city looked repetitive and it wasn't really suited to remote suburbs or high-rise city blocks. Thanks to the updates and various content packs, there are now, I think, 7 different styles and sizes of elementary school to choose from, and that sort of thing weirdly really does make a big difference. One reason that there are now so many options is the fact that they've finally added region packs. At time of writing, the French, German and UK packs have already been released, with more on the way. These are definitely welcome additions, and it's a bonus that they don't cost anything extra, but at least the community members who made them are getting paid. I was slightly concerned that because they were made by community members they wouldn't integrate well into the game, but I've had a chance to play around with some of them and I'm pretty pleased with the quality and consistency of the content. So what about the updates? Well, as I said at the start, I've been kind of surprised at how few updates have been made to the game in the year since it was first released. Yes, the studio is based in Finland and they have proper summer vacations and they're a relatively small studio, and I know firsthand that it takes time to develop, test and deploy these patches, but given the state that the game was in at launch, the backlash it received and the reputation damage done to both the studio and the publisher, I would have expected a lot more patches to fix the many bugs in the game and optimise the simulation. And it is in desperate need of optimisation. The performance still sucks. Grow your city to any decent size and there is no point in trying to run at double or triple speed, it just makes no difference. To be honest, I haven't really been keeping an eye on the actual graphical performance. I find that with the FPS counter turned off I don't notice most of the time. It will occasionally chug, but it's fine for this kind of game. I've said it before and I will say it again, most games don't need to run at 60 FPS, and city builders certainly don't. As I've said in my previous videos, it's not the graphical performance but the simulation performance that really needs work. That said, I'm sure graphics improvements can be made. I have a high-end rig and I still have to play on reduced settings to get a smooth frame rate, and there's a lot of distracting pop-in, dodgy shadows and level of detail switching, particularly if you've got a lot of trees in your city. Oh, and as I was clicking around in the game to record footage for this review, the game crashed. It's hard to hold that against them when I'm using mods. You have to accept that these things will happen when mods are active, but it doesn't make it any less frustrating. So it's good to see that updates are being made to the game, but not all updates are necessarily good for the game. For example, there used to be government subsidies in the game, which helped your city stay in the black when you were struggling, particularly in the early stages of building a new city. And to me, the game is just boring and frustrating when you just want to build and you can't make ends meet and the game grinds to a halt as you have to wait to make progress. Unfortunately, the developers listened to Biffa and some of the other streamers and removed this feature from the game entirely in order to make it harder for those who wanted a challenge, but it was an odd decision to remove them completely. Why not leave government subsidies in the game as an optional sort of easy mode for those of us who want a more casual experience? Then you make the game more flexible and appeal to a wider audience. Just a bit of an odd decision. Even ignoring the simulation and graphical optimizations, the game launched with fundamental flaws in several of its key gameplay features. Homelessness was bugged, there were issues with businesses not getting enough customers, areas of zoning kept glitching and going weird. Some of these have been fixed, but there are still a lot of issues and it just takes you out of the game. All of this just serves to emphasise that the game simply wasn't ready when it launched a year ago, and I don't believe it's ready even now. Either the developers were massively overambitious and tried to fit too much in, or the game was rushed out by the publisher before it was ready to be played, or more likely a combination of both. Fortunately, publishers seem too keen to rush out games before they're ready, and no, we have never been particularly patient with these things, particularly not when the games are released in the absolute state that this one was in. It's easy to say in hindsight, but I still think it would have been better if they'd taken features like natural disasters and car accidents out and launched into early access with fewer, more complete and polished features. It would have been much better received and given them time to iron out some of the kinks with the help of a more forgiving audience. And particularly when City Skylines 1 earned its success on the back of the abject failure that was SimCity 2013, it was a risky move to cock up the launch of Cities 2 when there were a lot of other developers out there that could have swept in to steal the limelight. But I digress. Final thoughts then? Well, I've always maintained that I could see the potential in City Skylines 2. In many ways it was a step backwards from Cities 1, but that game had had over 8 years of patches, expansions and modding when Cities 2 was launched, so it's unfair to compare the two at this stage. Cities 2 is a much more visually impressive game, with lots of new details and features that, as I said, has the potential to grow into a great sequel to the first game. Plus it has a much better sense of scale than its predecessor, even though that's not always a positive thing, as I've said in previous videos. All the new content and updates released over the last year have definitely made a difference and made it much easier to recommend the game now, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed with the pace of progress. There are still some fairly major issues with the core gameplay, and the graphics and simulation still need a lot of optimising, especially if they're ever going to live up to their promise of releasing on consoles. Not that I understand why you would want to play this game on console. This is the sort of game I wouldn't play with a controller if there's a mouse and keyboard available, but maybe that's just me. In summary, I expected more from the game in the beginning, and I expected more updates and improvements from the developers over the last 12 months. But with the recent increase in the pace of updates, I feel like there's still some hope. I look forward to the day when I can lose myself in the game the way I used to lose myself in Cities 1. We are a lot closer to that day, but it's still not quite here yet. For more on my opinion of City Skylines 2, check out the other videos in this playlist, and for other videos on writing, gaming and other nerdy stuff, you know what to do.